Tar Baby, Cassette 5.
It was easy not to believe in Margaret's hysteria. He had seen examples of it many times before, and thought she was up to her old combo of masochism plus narcissism that he believed common to exceptionally beautiful women. But when, in a flash too speedy for reflex, he saw his entire household standing there, and in each of their faces disgust and horror, and altogether triumphant, and altogether anticipating his command, already acting on it, in fact, just waiting for the signal from him to call the harbor police, and thereby make him acknowledge his mistake in not taking Margaret seriously, having to admit that he was not capable of judgment in a crisis, that he was wrong, that she was right, that his house had been violated, and he neither knew it or believed it when it was discovered. And it had been Sidney who had the foresight to have a gun and the legs to ferret out the intruder. When he saw Margaret's triumphant face, Jade's frightened one, and Sidney and Andine looking at the prisoner with faces as black as his, but smug. Their manner struck him as what Michael meant when he said bourgeois, in that tone that Valerian always thought meant unexciting, but now he thought meant false. But last night he thought meant Uncle Thomish. He had defended his servants vigorously to Michael then, with aphorisms about loyalty and decency, and with shouts that the press was ruining with typical carelessness the concept of honor for a people who had a hard enough time achieving any. What he had said to Jade, he believed, that Michael was a purveyor of exotics, a typical anthropologist, a cultural orphan who sought other cultures he could love without risk or pain. Valerian hated them, not from any hatred of the minority or alien culture, but because of what he saw to be the falseness and fraudulence of the anthropological position. The Indian problem, he told Michael, was between Indians, their conscience, and their own daring-do. And all of his loving treks from ghetto to reservation to barrio to migrant farm were searches for people in whose company the Michaels could enjoy the sorrow they were embarrassed to feel for themselves. And yet, in the space of that flash, he felt not only as Michael must have when he urged Jade to do something for her people, no matter how silly his instruction, but something more. Disappointment nudging contempt for the outrage Jade and Sidney and Andine exhibited in defending property and personnel that did not belong to them from a black man who was one of their own. As the evening progressed, Valerian thoroughly enjoyed the disarray that his invitation had thrown them into. Margaret ran from the room, foiled. Jade was at least sophisticated about it, but Sidney and Andine were wrecked, while the intruder himself didn't even look caught. He walked in with his hands raised and clasped behind his head, and looked neither right nor left, not at Jade or Andine or Margaret, but straight at Valerian, and in his eyes was neither a question nor a plea, and no threat whatsoever. Valerian was not afraid then, and he was not afraid at noon the next day, when Sidney tapped quietly on his door and brought his mail and his baked potato. Valerian could sense the small waiting in Sidney, some expectation or hope that his employer would give him a hint of what had been in his head last night. Valerian felt a twinge of compassion for him, but since he couldn't tell him about faces that looked up out of peaches, he said nothing at all. Actually, he had no plans. He was curious about the man, but not all that much. He assumed he was what he'd said he was, a crewman jumping ship, and his roaming about the house and grounds, hiding in Margaret's closet, was more outrageous than threatening. He had looked into the man's eyes and had no fear. Digesting his potato and sipping wine, he was rewarded for his serenity by an expansive "Howdy," followed by the entrance of the stranger, wrapped in a woman's kimono, barefoot, with gleaming wrought-iron hair. Valerian let his eyes travel cautiously down from the hair, to the robe, to the naked feet. The man smiled broadly. He looked down at himself, back at Valerian, and said, "But I don't do no windows." Valerian laughed shortly. "Good morning, Mr. Sheik. said the man. Street. Valerian Street, said Valerian. What did you say your name was? Green, William Green. Well, good morning, Willie. Sleep well? Yes, sir. Best sleep I ever had. Your name really Valerian? Yes. Valerian shrugged helplessly and smiled. I used to eat a candy called Valerians. Ours, said Valerian. Our candy company made them. No kidding. You named after a candy. The candy was named after me. I was named after an emperor. Oh, said the man, looking around the greenhouse. Its sudden coldness was delicious after the heat outside. Shady and cool, with plants shooting from pots and boxes everywhere. It's sure pretty in here, he said, still smiling. Tell me the truth, said Valerian, before you get confused by what you see. What were you really doing in my wife's bedroom? The man stopped smiling. The truth? He looked down at the brick walk in some embarrassment. The truth is, I made a mistake. I thought it was the other one. What other one? The other bedroom. Jade's? Yes, sir. I thought I smelled oyster stew out back yesterday, and it got dark early, the fog, I mean. They done left the kitchen, and I thought I'd try to get me some, but before I knew it, I heard them coming back. I couldn't run out the back door, so I run through another one. It was the dining room. I ran upstairs into the first room I seen. When I got in, I seen it was a bedroom, but I thought it belonged to the one y'all called Jade. I aimed to hide there till I could get out, but then I heard somebody coming, and I ducked into the closet. I was just as scared as your wife when she opened that door and turned the light on me. You've been skulking around here for days. Why didn't you ask at the kitchen for something to eat? Scared? I ain't got a passport, I told you. You going to turn me over to the police? Well, not in that get-up, certainly. Yeah, he looked at his kimono again and laughed. They'd give me life. I don't reckon you have an old suit to lend me. Then I can go to jail in style. In one of my suits, they'd make you governor. I'll tell Sidney to find something for you, but don't be surprised if he bites your head off. Suddenly the man jumped and stamped his feet on the bricks. What's the matter? Ants, he said. Oh, dear, you've let them in, and I'm out of thalamide. Valerian stood up. Over there, that can. Spray the door sill. It won't do much good, but it'll help for a while. And tuck that muslin in tighter. The man did as he was told, and then said, You ought to get mirrors. Mirrors for what? Put outside the door, they won't come near a mirror. Really? Yeah, he said, and sprayed some of the ant killer on his legs. His kimono came undone at the belt and fell away from his body. Valerian looked at his genitals and the skinny black thighs. You can't go around like that in front of the ladies. Leave that alone and go tell Sidney to give you some clothes. Tell him I said so. The man looked up, letting the kimono hang to his sides. You ain't gonna turn me in? I guess not. You didn't take anything, but we'll have to figure out a way to get you some papers. Go on now. Get some clothes. Valerian took the ant spray and set it down near a heavy plant of many shades of green. Its leaves spread out healthily, and long stems stood straight up among them. Stems with closed buds. Valerian peered into the plant and frowned. What's the matter with it? Asked the man. Looks sick. Valerian turned the pot around for a different view. I don't know. It's been in bud like that for I don't know how long. They won't open no matter what I do. Shake it, said the man. They just need jacking up. And he walked over to the cyclamen, and with thumb and middle finger, flicked the stems hard, as though they were naughty students. What the hell are you doing? Valerian reached out to grab the man's hand. Don't worry. They'll be in bloom tomorrow morning. If they are, I'll buy you a brand new suit. If they die, I'll have Sidney chase you back into the sea." "Deal," said the man. "I know all about plants. They like women. You have to jack 'em up every once in a while, make 'em act nice, like they're supposed to." He finished flicking the cyclamen stems and smiled first to himself and then at Valerian. "Did you ever hear the one about the 3 colored whores who went to heaven?" "No," said Valerian. "Tell me." And he did. And it was a good joke. Very funny. And when Jadine ran to the greenhouse, certain the noise coming from it was somebody murdering somebody, she heard laughter to beat the band. Sidney had put some of his boss's old clothes in the guest room for him, and Valerian sent him off with Gideon to get a haircut, because Sidney refused flat out to cut it. Valerian half expected the man would get into town and not return, since he had given him enough money to buy some underwear and some shoes that fit him better than his did. While Valerian had dinner alone that night, served by a silent, steeping butler, and while Margaret powdered in her room and Jadine ate with Andine in the kitchen, Mr. Green, alias Son, drifted off with Gideon and Therese in the Prix de France. With country people's pride in a come-from-far guest, they paraded the American Negro through the streets of town like a king. Gideon even got one of his friends to give them a free taxi ride to the outskirts of town, and then they had to walk and walk and walk up into the hills to Place Devant before they reached the powder-pink house where he lived with Therese and sometimes Alma Estee. Therese was in ecstasy, and kept moving her head about, the better to see him out of her broken eyes. As soon as they got ashore, she let it be known to every island black she saw that they had a guest, a visitor from the States, and that he was going to spend the night. Her pride and her message ran all over the streets and up the hillside, and at various times during the evening, heads poked into her doorway, and neighbors dropped by on some pretense or other. Therese sent Alma Estee flying back down the hill to the market for a packet of brown sugar, and she went into the bag that hung by her side under her dress for money for goat meat and 2 onions. Then she brewed black, thick coffee while she listened to the men talk and waited her turn. Gideon told her stories on Ile des Chevaliers, but here at home he did not socialize with her. He kept to himself, or spent his free time with old cronies. Only at work, on the island of the rich Americans, did he entertain her. Now she was to be privy to the talk between them, and in her house at that. She would also have a chance to ask the American black herself whether it was really so that American women killed their babies with their fingernails. She waited until Gideon had cut his hair with clippers he had borrowed from the man who sold rum. Waited until great clouds of glittering graphite hair fell to the floor and on the bedspread they had wrapped around the man's neck and the front of his whole body. Waited until Gideon was through with his boasts about when he was in the States, boasts about the nurse he had married, the hospital he had worked in, the hatefulness of that nurse and all American women. Waited until Gideon had lied about all the money he made there and why he returned home. Waited until the stranger, who ate chocolate and drank bottled water, was properly shorn and his neck dusted with baking soda. And Alma Estee was back, and the meat was frying on the 2-burner stove. Waited till they ate it and drank coffee loaded with sugar. Waited till they opened the bottle of rum, and the chocolate eater had coughed like a juvenile with his first taste of it. Therese served the 2 men, but didn't eat with them. Instead, she stood at the portable stove, burning the hair she had swept up from the floor, burning it carefully and methodically, with many glances at the chocolate eater to show him she meant him no evil. When they had eaten, and Therese had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their guests' English, she joined them at the table. Alma Estee sat on the cot by the window. Son smoked Gideon's cigarettes and poured the rest of the rum into his coffee. He stretched his legs and permitted himself a hearthside feeling, comfortable and free of postures and phony accents. The tough goat meat, the smoked fish, the pepper-hot gravy over the rice settled in him. It had been served all on one plate, and he knew what the delicacies had cost them. The sweet, thick cookies, the canned milk, and especially the rum. The nakedness of his face and head made him vulnerable, but his hosts gave him adoration to cover it. Alma Estee had taken off her short print dress and returned in her best clothes, a school uniform. But Son knew right away that she had not had school tuition for a long time now. The uniform was soiled and frayed. He could feel her waves of desire washing over him, and for the first time in years he felt like a well-heeled man. Therese urged him on into a feast of plantain and fried avocado, then leaned toward him in the lamplight, her broken eyes cheerful, and asked him, "Is it true? American women reach into their wombs and kill their babies with their fingernails?" "Close down your mouth," Gideon said to her, and then to Son, "She's gone stupid as well as blind." He explained to Son that he used to tell her what working in an American hospital was like, about free abortions and D&Cs, the scraping of the womb, but that Therese had her own views of understanding that had nothing to do with the world's views. That however he tried to explain a blood bank to her or an eye bank, she always twisted it. The word bank, he thought, confused her. And it was true. Therese said America was where doctors took the stomachs, eyes, umbilical cords, the backs of the neck where the hair grew, blood, sperm, hearts, and fingers of the poor, and froze them in plastic bags to be sold later to the rich. Where children, as well as grown people, slept with dogs in their beds. Where women took their children behind trees in the park and sold them to strangers. Where everybody on the television set was naked, and that even the priests were women. Where, for a bar of gold, a doctor could put you into a machine and in a matter of minutes would change you from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. Where it was not uncommon or strange to see people with both penises and breasts. "Both," she said, "a man's parts and a woman's on the same person, yes?" "Yes," said Son. "And they grow food in pots to decorate their houses? Avocado and banana and potato and limes?" Son was laughing. "Right," he said, "right." "Don't encourage her, man," said Gideon. "She's a mean one, and one of the blind race. You can't tell them nothing. They love lies." Therese said she was not of that race, that the blind race lost their sight around 40, and she was into her 50s, and her vision had not gone dark until a few years ago. Gideon started to tease her about being into her 50s. 60s, more like, he said, and she had faked sight so long she didn't remember herself when she started to go blind. Son asked who were the blind race. So Gideon told him a story about a race of blind people, descended from some slaves who went blind the minute they saw Dominique. A fisherman's tale, he said. The island where the rich Americans lived is named for them, he said. Their ship foundered and sank with Frenchmen, horses, and slaves aboard. The blinded slaves could not see how or where to swim, so they were at the mercy of the current and the tide. They floated and trod water and ended up on that island along with the horses that had swum ashore. Some of them were only partially blinded and were rescued later by the French and returned to Queen of France and indenture. The others, totally blind, hid. The ones who came back had children who, as they got on into middle age, went blind too. What they saw with the eye of the mind, and that, of course, was not to be trusted. Therese, he said, was one such. He himself was not, since his mother and Therese had different fathers. Son felt dizzy. The cheap rum and the story together made his head light. What happened to the ones who hid on the island? Were they ever caught? No, man, still there, said Gideon. They ride those horses all over the hills. They learn to ride through the rainforest, avoiding all sorts of trees and things. They race each other, and for sport, they sleep with the swamp women in Saint-Devier. Just before a storm, you can hear them screwing way over here. Sounds like thunder, he said, and burst into derisive laughter. Son laughed too, then asked, "Seriously, did anybody ever see one of them?" "No, and they can't stand for sighted people to look at them without their permission. No telling what they'll do if they know you saw them." "We thought you was one," said Therese. "She thought," said Gideon. "Not me, personally. I think the blindness comes from second-degree syphilis." Therese ignored this remark. "I was the one made him leave the window that way, so you could get the food," said Therese. "You did that?" Son smiled at her. Therese tapped her chest bone with pride. "Miss Therese, love of my life, I thank you from the bottom of my heart." Son took her hand and kissed the knuckles. Therese shrieked and cackled with happiness. "I said you wouldn't ask Miss Shetty Hair for anything, so I left food for you in the wash-house. You never came for it." "Miss Shetty Hair? The cook? That one. That devil. The one I almost drowned myself for twice a week. No matter what the weather, I got to drown myself to get there." "Don't listen to her. She knows those waters just like the fishermen. She doesn't like the Americans for meanness. Just because they're a little snooty sometimes. I get along with them okay. When they say to let Therese go, I say okay. But I bring her right back and tell them it's a brand new woman." "They don't know?" "Not yet. They don't pay her any attention." Stimulated by the hand kiss, Therese wanted to ask more questions about the women who clawed their wounds, but Gideon grew loud and stopped her. "She was a wet nurse," he told Son, "and made her living from white babies. Then formula came, and she almost starved to death. Fishing kept her alive." "Infamil," said Therese, banging her fist on the table. "How can you feed a baby a thing calling itself infamil? Sounds like murder and a bad reputation. But my breast go on giving," she said. "I got milk to this day." "Go away, woman. Who wants to hear about your wretched tits? Go on out of here." Gideon shooed her, and she left the table but not the room. When she was quiet, Gideon waved his arm about the house and told Son, "You're welcome here any time you want." His arm took in the cot where Therese slept at night, the floor where Alma Estee sometimes slept, and the tiny bedroom where he did. Son nodded. "Thanks." "I mean it, any time. Not much life going on over there. Maybe you could find work here. Plenty work here, you young." Son sipped rum-laced coffee, wondering why, if there was plenty work there, Gideon wasn't doing any of it. "How long you been working over there?" 3 years steady now, on and off before. They used to come seasonal." "Did you become a citizen in the States?" "Sure. Why you think I married that crazy nurse woman? Got a passport and everything. But listen, I don't let on over there that I can read. Too much work they give you. Instructions about how to install this and that. I make out that I can't read at all." "You've been away so long, you must have lost your citizenship by now." Gideon shrugged. "The U.S. is a bad place to die in," he said. He didn't regret it. The only thing he regretted was his unemployment insurance. A marvelous, marvelous thing that was. You had to hand it to the U.S. They knew how to make money, and they knew how to give it away. The most generous people on the globe. Now, the French were as tight as a virgin, but the Americans, After a while, they were quiet. Therese was breathing heavily, so Son thought she was asleep. He couldn't see her eyes, but Alma's were bright and on him. "You going back?" asked Gideon. "To the island?" "I don't know." "You want to get in there, don't you, eh? That yalla." Gideon stroked his chin. "Man," said Son. "Oh, man." He said it with enthusiasm, but he put a period in his voice, too. He didn't want her chewed over by Gideon's stone-white teeth. Didn't want her in Gideon's mind, his eye. It unnerved him to think that Gideon had looked at her at all. The old man heard the period in his voice and turned the conversation to serious advice. "Your first yeller," he asked. "Look out. It's hard for them not to be white people. Hard, I'm telling you. Most never make it. Some try, but most don't make it." "She's not a yeller," said Son. "Just a little light." He didn't want any discussion about shades of black folk. "Don't fool yourself. You should have seen her 2 months ago. What you see is tannin from the sun. Yallers don't come to being black natural-like. They have to choose it, and most don't choose it. Be careful of the stuff they put down." "I'll be careful." "Come on," said Gideon. "Let's go see some of the boys. Let me show you this place. Paradise, boy, paradise." They got up to leave, and Alma Estee sprang into life. She stood near the door and stretched out her hand. Son stopped and smiled at her. "You think," she said, whispering, "you think you can send to America for me and buy me a wig? I have a picture of it." And she pulled from the pocket of her school blazer a folded picture, which she tried her best to show him before Gideon pushed her away. "Tarzan mind if I use his piano?" It was incredible what Hickey Freeman and a little Paco Rabanne could do. He held the jacket by his forefinger over his shoulder. With the other hand, he struck the keys. Jadine was startled. In a white shirt unbuttoned at the cuffs and throat, and with a gentle homemade haircut, he was gorgeous. He had preserved his mustache, but the kinky beard was gone along with the Chang Gang hair. "If I were wearing Tarzan's suit," she said, "I'd show a little respect." "That's why I asked. I'm showing respect." "Then ask him yourself," she answered, and turned to leave. She had been sitting in the living room after lunch, waiting for Margaret, when he entered and stood at the piano. She was impressed and relieved by his looks, but his behavior in her bedroom was uppermost in her mind. "Wait," he said. "I want to talk to you. Apologize. I'm sorry about yesterday." "Good," she said, and kept walking. "You can't forgive me?" he asked. Jadine stopped and turned around. "Why not?" He stayed near the piano, but looked directly at her, the question apparently important to him. Jadine took a few steps toward him. "I don't have to explain anything to you. But I said I'm sorry. You can figure out why I did it, can't you? You were so clean standing in that pretty room, and I was so dirty. I was ashamed, kinda, so I got mad and tried to dirty you, that's all. And I'm sorry." "Okay, you're sorry you did it. I'm sorry you did it. Let's just drop it." She turned around once more. "Wait. What for?" "I want to play you something." He tossed his jacket on the piano lid and sat down on the stool. "Would you believe this is one of the things I used to do for a living?" He played a chord, then another, and tried a whole phrase, but his fingers would not go where he directed them. Slowly, he took his hands away from the keys and stared at them. "Couldn't have been much of a living," she said. "It wasn't. I could barely keep up with the drums when I was cooking my best. Now," he turned his hands over and looked up at her with a very small smile, "maybe I'll just do the melody." He tapped out a line. "I don't like what you did, here? So don't play any songs for me." "Hard," he said without looking up. "Hard, hard lady." "Right." "Okay, I quit. I just wanted to tell you I was sorry, and that you don't have to be nervous anymore." "I'm not nervous," she answered. "I was never nervous. I was mad." "Or mad either." She walked toward him now, and leaned an elbow on the piano, her thumbnail pressed into her bottom teeth. I suppose Valerian invited you to stay for Christmas? Did he? Didn't he? I don't know. I just got back this minute. Jadine stepped away from the piano and looked out the sliding glass doors. He's carrying on this morning about some flower you made bloom. Oh, that. He hasn't got enough wind in there. It needed shaking. You some sort of farmer? No, just a country boy. Well, listen, country boy. My aunt and uncle are upset. You go and apologize to them. Their name is Childs. Sidney and Andine Childs. I had to throw the pajamas you left in my bathroom out the window so they wouldn't see them. You don't have to apologize to me. I can take care of myself, but you apologize to them. All right, he said. And she sure did look it, like she could take care of herself. He didn't know that all the time he tinkled the keys, she was holding tight to the reins of dark dogs with silver feet. For she was more frightened of his good looks than she had been by his ugliness the day before. She watched him walk away, saying, "See you later," and thought that 2 months in that place with no man at all made even a river rat look good. There was no denying the fact that looking at his face and keeping her voice stern required some concentration. Spaces, mountains, savannas, all those were in his forehead and eyes. Too many art history courses, she thought, had made her not perceptive but simple-minded. She saw planes and angles and missed character. Like the vision in Yellow. She should have known that bitch would be the kind to spit at somebody, and now this man with savannas in his eyes was distracting her from the original insult. She wanted to sketch him and get it over with. But when she thought of trying to lay down that space and get the eagle beak of his nose, she got annoyed with herself. And did he have a cleft in his chin? Jadine closed her eyes to see it better, but couldn't remember. She left the room and climbed the stairs quickly. Christmas will be over soon. She had called Air France, just as she promised Margaret she would, but she also made a reservation for herself for December 28th, standby, just in case. This winter retreat thing was running out anyway. She hadn't accomplished anything. Was more at loose ends here than anywhere. At least in Paris there was work, excitement. She thought she had better go to New York, do this job, and then return to Paris and Rick. The idea of starting a business of her own, she thought, was a fumble. Valerian would lend her the money, she knew, but maybe that was a sidestep, too. It was a silly age, 25, too old for teenage dreaming, too young for settling down. Every corner was a possibility and a dead end. Work? At what? Marriage? Work and marriage? Where? Who? What could I do with this degree? Do I really want to model? It was nothing like she thought it would be. Soft and lovely smiles and soft and lovely clothes. It was knife hard, and everybody frowned and screamed all the time. And if ever she wanted to paint a predatory jungle scene, she would use the faces of the people who bought the clothes. She was bored, and no more together than the river rat. She kept calling him that, river rat. Sidney called him swamp nigger. What the hell did he say his name was? And even if she could remember it, would she say it out loud without reaching for the leash? Son went immediately from the living room piano to the kitchen, and finding it empty, walked down to the lower kitchen, which was empty also. He retraced his steps and noticed a door on the landing to the short flight of stairs separating the kitchens. He rapped shortly, and a voice said, "Yes?" He opened the door. "Mrs. Childs?" Andine was soaking her feet in a basin. At first she thought it was Yardman. He alone on the island called her that. Even the Filipinos over at the nearest house called her Andine. But the clean-shaven man in the doorway was not Yardman. "J. Dean said it was all right if I came to see you," he said. "What you want?" "To apologize. I didn't mean to scare everybody." Son did not allow himself a smile. "Well, I hate to think what would be the case if you had meant to." "I was a little off from not eating. Drove me a little nuts, ma'am." "You could have asked," Andine said. "You could have come to the door decent-like and asked." "Yes, ma'am, but I'm like an outlaw. I jumped ship. I couldn't take a chance, and I stayed too hungry to think. I was in a little trouble back in the States, too. I'm, just out here trying to hang in." "What kind of trouble?" "Car trouble. Wrecked a car and couldn't pay for it. No insurance, no money, you know." Andine was watching him closely, sitting in a chintz rocker, rubbing one foot against the other in an Epsom salt solution. The difference between this room and the rest of the house was marked. Here was second-hand furniture, table scarves, tiny pillows, scatter rugs, and the smell of human beings. It had a tacky permanence to it, but closed to outsiders. No visitors ever came in here. There were no extra chairs, no display of tea set, just the things they used, Sidney and Andine, and used well. A stack of Philadelphia Tribunes piled neatly on the coffee table. Worn house slippers to the left of the door. Photographs of women with their legs crossed at the ankles, and men standing behind wicker chairs touching them lightly with their fingers. Groups of people standing on stairs. One blue-tinted photograph of a man with magnificent handlebar mustaches. All dressed up black people of some earlier day who looked like they had serious business at hand. Andine sensed his absorption of her apartment. "Not as grand, I suppose, as where you sleep." Now he did smile. "Too grand," he said. "Much too grand for me. I feel out of place there." "I shouldn't wonder." "I want to apologize to your husband, too. Is he here?" "He'll be back in a minute." Son thought she sounded like the single woman who answers the door and wants the caller to think there is a huge, tough male in the next room. "I'll be gone soon. Mr. Street said he would help me get papers. He has friends in town, he says." She looked skeptical. "But even if he doesn't, I've got to make tracks. I just don't want you upset or worried. I didn't come here for no harm." "Well, I'm more inclined to believe you now that you had a bath. You was one ugly something." "I know. Don't think I don't know it." "You went off with Yardman yesterday." It bothered him that everybody called Gideon Yardman, as though he had not been mothered. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Mr. Street told me to. I spent the night there. I started to just stay on there, since that's where I was heading for in the first place, but I didn't want to leave without making peace with you all. My own mama wouldn't forgive me for that." "Where is your own mama?" "Dead now. We live in Florida. Just my father, my sister, and me. But I don't know if he's alive still." Andine saw the orphan in him and rubbed her feet together. "What line of work you in?" "I've been at sea off and on for 8 years. All over. Dry cargo, mostly. Wrecks." "Married?" "Yes, ma'am. But she's dead, too. It was when she died that I got in that car trouble and had to leave Florida before they threw me in jail. That's when I started fooling around on docks." "What's the matter with your feet, Mrs. Charles?" "Tired? Stand on any feet for 30 years and they might talk back." "You should put banana leaves in your shoes. Better than Dr. Scholl's." "Is that so?" "Yeah. Want me to get you some?" "I'll get 'em if I want to. Later on." "Well, I'll leave you alone now." And he turned to go just as Sidney walked in. His face zigzagged like lightning as soon as he saw who was standing there talking to his wife.
This ends side 1 of cassette 5. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.